Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back through the centuries, past the fall of Rome, past the birth of Christ, all the way to the sun-drenched coast of Egypt in the 3rd century BC. You're standing on the deck of a creaking merchant ship, the salty air thick with the smell of cedarwood and damp rope. And you re-watching a sliver of land resolve into the greatest city of the ancient world, Alexandria. We are going to walk its marbled streets, breathe its library's dusty air, and try to understand what it felt like to live at the very center of human knowledge, just before it all vanished. A little reality check before we begin. Given the state of ancient medicine, sanitation, and the occasional political purge, you probably won't survive this trip. But the view will be spectacular. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And for a bit of fun, post your location and what time it is for you in the comments below. It's always amazing to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't the city, but the light. It's a brilliant, impossibly bright pillar of light, even in the daytime. Your captain, a grizzled Phoenician who has sailed these routes 100 times, grunts and points a leathery finger. The Pharos, the great lighthouse of Alexandria. It's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and from here, you can see why. A constant plume of smoke drifts from its peak, which at night will be replaced by a fire, its light magnified by a mysterious polished mirror that sailors swear can be seen for 50 kilometers. It's your welcome beacon and your North Star, a signal that you have arrived at the edge of the known world and the beginning of a new one. As the ship navigates the complex harbor, carefully avoiding the submerged rocks of the Antrohodos Island, the city itself comes into focus. And it's orderly. Too orderly. Unlike the chaotic, tangled streets of older cities that grew like weeds over centuries, Alexandria feels designed, planned. That's because it was. Barely a generation ago, the world's most famous overachiever, Alexander the Great, stood on this very strip of land around 331 BC, saw its potential as a deep-water port linking Greece to the riches of Egypt and the Nile Valley, and said, Egyptian laborers jostle past Greek soldiers, Jewish merchants haggle with Nubian traders, and Roman diplomats look on with a mixture of awe and suspicion. It's a multicultural soup, and it's simmering with energy. You finally disembark, your sea legs feeling wobbly on the stone quay. The air changes instantly. The clean salt smell is replaced by a dizzying assault on your senses. It's the smell of humanity packed tight. Sweat, charcoal fires, baking bread, expensive perfumes worn by the wealthy to mask the stench of the sewers, and the unmistakable aroma of spices from the East: cinnamon, frankincense, pepper piled high in the market stalls. You hear a dozen languages you don't recognize, a testament to the city's role as a global crossroads. Egyptian laborers jostle past Greek soldiers, Jewish merchants haggle with Nubian traders, and Roman diplomats look on with a mixture of awe and suspicion. It's a multicultural soup, and it's simmering with energy. You see women with elaborate braided hair and dramatic kohl eyeliner, a fashion that has been an Egyptian staple for millennia. Some of them have a strange greenish paste on their faces, and you wrinkle your nose. Someone next to you, a friendly Greek clerk, notices your expression. Sun-warding paste, he says with a shrug. Crocodile dung and honey, very effective. You make a mental note to stick to the shade. No amount of ancient wisdom is worth putting that on your skin. That's the kind of quirky detail they leave out of the heroic statues. But through the chaos, the dust, and the unconventional cosmetics, you feel something else. It's an undercurrent of ambition, a citywide hum of intellectual curiosity. This isn't just a place for trading goods, it's a place for trading ideas. Alexander may have wanted a port, but the dynasty he left in his wake, the Ptolemies, wanted something more. They wanted to build not just a capital, but the capital of the mind. They didn't just want to rule Egypt. They wanted to own the very concept of knowledge. And to do that, they needed a library. Not just any library, but a great one. The Great Library. Historians still argue whether Alexander himself ever sketched out a plan for a center of learning, or if this grand project was entirely the brainchild of his successors. As you look around, you realize the most impressive buildings aren't the palaces or the barracks. They are the gleaming white structures of marble and limestone dedicated to the muses, the goddesses of the arts. The Mausoleum. It's a sprawling university campus, and at its heart is the legendary library. You don't even know where it is yet, but you can feel its gravity, its pull. It's a promise whispered on the sea breeze, a dream of gathering every story, every discovery, every poem, every map, every last scrap of human thought from every corner of the earth, and putting it all under one roof. Here, in this brand new city, buzzing with the energy of 1,000 different cultures, you are about to witness the birth of the most ambitious intellectual project in human history. And for a moment, standing on the docks of this forgotten world, you believe it might actually be possible. You leave the clamor of the port behind, moving deeper into the city. The streets here are cleaner, the crowds thinner and better dressed. You've entered the Bruchion, the royal quarter, which occupies almost a third of the entire city. It's a city within a city, a glittering district of palaces, private gardens, and temples. The air feels different, less about commerce and more about power. And all of this, the entire grand enterprise, is the vision of one man. A man you need to understand if you're to have any hope of understanding the library. His name is Ptolemy, the first of his name to rule Egypt. His official title is Ptolemy I Soter, or Ptolemy the Savior, a name he earned by defending the island of Rhodes, but you can think of him as the ultimate career switcher. He started as a boyhood friend and trusted general to Alexander the Great, a battle-hardened Macedonian soldier who rode with Alexander from Greece to India. When Alexander died suddenly in 323 BC, leaving behind a massive empire with no clear heir, his top generals, the Diadochi, fell upon the territory like wolves. In the ensuing scramble, Ptolemy, arguably the cleverest of the bunch, snagged the prize jewel, Egypt. It was rich, defensible, and had a history stretching back millennia. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a shrewd politician who understood that swords could win a kingdom, but they couldn't hold it. For that, you needed something more. This is where the grand idea begins to take shape. Ptolemy, now pharaoh of Egypt, needs to cement his rule. He's a Greek Macedonian ruling a fiercely proud and ancient Egyptian population. He needs to look legitimate, not just to his new subjects, but to the rest of the Hellenistic world. And what better way to do that than by making his new capital Alexandria the undisputed cultural and intellectual center of the universe? Athens had held that title for centuries, but its star was fading. Ptolemy decided he would buy it, build it, and transplanted right here on the shores of the Nile. It was a power play of epic proportions, dressed up in the noble robes of scholarship. To help him with this audacious project, he brought in a consultant. This was Demetrius of Phaleron, an exiled Athenian statesman and philosopher. Demetrius was a student of Aristotle's school, the Lyceum, and he had a bit of a reputation. Back in Athens, he'd ruled as a tyrant for a decade, known for his flamboyant laws and, according to some accounts, his rather extensive and expensive beauty routine. When he was kicked out of Athens, he brought his big ideas and presumably his hair products to Egypt. It was Demetrius who likely whispered the key concept into Ptolemy's ear. Don't just build a library. Build a Mausian shrine of the Muses. The Muses, the 9 Greek goddesses of inspiration for literature, science, and the arts, apparently required a very well-funded and well-staffed institution to do their best work. The Mausian wasn't just a building with shells. It was a revolutionary concept, a government-sponsored think tank. Ptolemy would invite the greatest minds of the Greek-speaking world poets, mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, philosophers, to come live and work in Alexandria. He'd pay them a generous stipend, give them free room and board, exempt them from taxes, and ask for only one thing in return: to think, to debate, to research, to write, and to push the boundaries of knowledge, all under his patronage. These scholars were, in a way, the original influencers, and Ptolemy was building them the ultimate creator house. And at the heart of this magnificent Mausian, the engine that would power all this discovery, would be the library. Its mission was simple and breathtakingly arrogant: to obtain a copy of every single book in the world. All of them. From the epic poems of Homer to Greek tragedies, from histories of the Persian Wars to Babylonian astronomical charts and Egyptian medical texts. If it was written down, Ptolemy wanted it. Scholars still debate whether Ptolemy's primary motive was a genuine love of knowledge or a cold, calculated strategy for political dominance. The truth is, it was almost certainly both. Every scroll acquired was another brick in the wall of his dynasty's prestige. Every discovery made by his scholars was a testament to his wisdom as a patron. The library wasn't a public service, it was a statement. It declared that Alexandria was the new Athens, and Ptolemy was the new Pericles. This was the start of a cultural arms race. Other Hellenistic kings, like the Attalids in Pergamum, would soon try to copy the model, building their own grand library to compete with Alexandria's. But Ptolemy had the first-mover advantage in the deep pockets of the Egyptian treasury. He wasn't just collecting scrolls. He was collecting human capital. He was creating an intellectual gravity, well so powerful, it would pull in the best and the brightest for generations to come. You are standing in the city built by this ambition, a city designed to be a grand stage for a new kind of Empire One, built not just on conquered land, but on hoarded knowledge. And just up ahead, past a tranquil garden filled with exotic plants brought back from military campaigns, you see the gleaming colonnades of the Mausian complex. The air grows quiet, reverent. You are about to step onto holy ground, not for any god, but for the human mind itself. You pass under an archway and into the grounds of the Mausian. The noise of the city drops away, replaced by the gentle rustle of papyrus leaves in the landscaped gardens and the soft murmur of scholarly debate. The complex is not one single building, but a sprawling campus of interconnected structures, all gleaming white marble that is almost painful to look at in the Egyptian sun. It feels less like a library and more like a modern university, a place of immense privilege and purpose. Your first impression is one of space and order, a stark contrast to the lively chaos of the city you just left behind. You walk along a grand covered walkway, a peripatos, its roof held up by a forest of Doric columns. This is where scholars stroll, escaping the heat of the day, their conversations echoing softly in the enclosed space. You see them everywhere, Old men with long gray beards leaning on walking sticks, locked in intense discussion with younger men who listen with rapt attention. They are dressed in simple linen robes, but you can feel the intellectual energy radiating from them. They gesture emphatically, sometimes stopping to draw a geometric proof in the sand with a stick before scuffing it out and walking on. The very air here seems thicker with thought. To your left, you see a building that looks like a small temple. This is the shrine that gives the whole complex its name, a place dedicated to the Muses. It's not for public worship, but a formal religious space for the resident scholars, a reminder of the divine inspiration they are supposed to be channeling. Further on, there are lecture halls, laboratories for anatomical research, and even an astronomical observatory with rudimentary sighting instruments pointing towards the impossibly clear sky. One can only imagine the star charts drawn up here, free from the light pollution that veils our own modern view of the cosmos. You catch a strange, slightly acrid smell coming from one of the buildings. A scholar passing by, seeing your curious glance, explains that it's one of the anatomy theaters. Ptolemy I, breaking with powerful Greek taboos, was the first ruler to authorize and even encourage the practice of human dissection. Physicians like Eryphilus and Erasistratus working here were able to make foundational discoveries about the nervous system, the brain, and the heart, all because of the unique intellectual freedom and supply of bodies, often condemned criminals granted by their royal patron. It's a slightly morbid thought, but it underlines the radical nature of the research that happened here. At the center of it all is the main dining hall, the Syssician. This is the social heart of the Mausian. All the resident scholars eat their meals here together, free of charge. It's a crucial part of the design, a forced mingling that ensures an astronomer might find himself sitting next to a poet and a historian next to a mathematician. This cross-pollination of ideas is the secret sauce of the institution. Imagine a dinner table where Eratosthenes is explaining how he plans to measure the circumference of the earth, while the poet Callimachus is complaining about the sheer volume of new scrolls he has to catalog. This is where ideas would spark, where collaborations would be born, and where fierce intellectual rivalries would fester. It's a cafeteria for geniuses. And then you see it, the bibliothek, the great library itself. It's not one building, but a series of halls and colonnades connected to the Mausion. As you approach the entrance, you see men unloading crates from a cart. The crates are filled with scrolls, each one tagged with a small clay tablet indicating its origin. These are new acquisitions, ready to be processed. The library itself is a wonder of architecture. You step inside one of the main halls. Your eyes need a moment to adjust from the bright sun to the cool, dim interior. The room is vast, with a high ceiling supported by elegant Corinthian columns. Light filters in from high, narrow windows, strategically placed to illuminate the space without allowing direct, damaging sunlight to hit the precious contents. The walls are lined with niches, or armaria, from floor to ceiling. Inside these niches are the scrolls, tens of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands. They are mostly papyrus, their pale, sandy color giving the whole room a warm, golden glow. Each scroll is rolled tight, with a small papyrus tagasilibos dangling from it, bearing its title and author. They are grouped by subject: poetry in this hall, philosophy in the next, medicine, astronomy, history, rhetoric, cookery, and law, each in its own dedicated space. It's an architecture of knowledge, a physical representation of the structure of human thought. Historians still argue whether the scrolls were stored in the niches themselves, or if the niches held wooden chests or cupboards, which in turn held the scrolls. It's a small detail, but one that changes how you picture the daily life of a librarian here. You watch as a librarian, a quiet, serious-looking man, directs a team of scribes. They are carefully unrolling a new scroll, preparing it for copying. The air is filled with the faint, dry, dusty scent of old papyrus, a smell that is both ancient and scholarly. It's the perfume of preserved thought. There's a low, constant hum of activity, the quiet scratching of reed pens in the scriptorium, the soft thud of scrolls being placed on tables, the hushed whispers of scholars consulting a text. There are no loud noises here. It's a sanctuary. You feel an overwhelming sense of awe, not just at the scale of the collection, but at the ambition it represents. To stand here is to stand in the intellectual treasury of the ancient world. Every shelf holds a universe of stories, a lifetime of research. And as you gaze at the endless rows of scrolls, you feel a profound sense of both wonder and, knowing what's to come, a deep, deep sadness. You're still standing in one of the great halls of the library, mesmerized by the sheer volume of scrolls. But as you watch the meticulous work of the scribes and librarians, a nagging question forms in your mind. How did all of this get here? Surely, not every author in the ancient world just happily sent a copy of their latest work to Alexandria. The answer reveals a much more aggressive, and frankly, a much less noble side to this grand intellectual project. The Ptolemies didn't just wait for knowledge to come to them. They went out and took it, using methods that ranged from lavish spending to outright piracy. The primary method was, of course, money. The Ptolemaic kings poured an immense fortune into acquisitions. Royal agents were dispatched all over the Mediterranean and beyond with what was essentially a blank check from the Egyptian treasury. They traveled to the great book markets of Athens, Rhodes, and Pergamum, instructed to buy the best and oldest copies of any text they could find. They were notorious for outbidding everyone, driving up the price of rare scrolls to astronomical levels. One famous, and possibly exaggerated, story tells of Ptolemy III Euergetes, who wanted the official Athenian state copies of the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. These were cultural treasures, the master copies. Athens refused to sell, but agreed to lend them for copying in exchange for a ridiculously large deposit of 15 talents of silver, enough to pay a skilled worker for more than 100 years. Ptolemy agreed, had the scrolls sent to Alexandria, and then sent a message back to Athens. You can keep the silver, we're keeping the scrolls. He had magnificent new copies made on the finest papyrus, and sent those back to Athens instead. The Athenians were furious, but what could they do? It was a classic power move, a declaration that Alexandria now owned culture itself. This royal obsession trickled down and became state policy. And this is where things get really interesting and a bit shady. Ptolemy III enacted a remarkable law. Every single ship that sailed into Alexandria's bustling harbor, one of the busiest in the world, was to be stopped and searched, not for contraband, not for weapons, but for books. Any scroll found on board, whether it belonged to a merchant, a diplomat, or a tourist, was confiscated. You can imagine the scene. You've just survived a perilous sea journey. You're excited to finally reach the great city. And the first thing that happens is a stern-looking official comes aboard and demands you hand over the scroll of poetry your grandfather gave you. These confiscated texts were taken directly to the library, to a special wing sometimes referred to as the ship books department. Here, the library's army of scribes would get to work, copying the text onto fresh sheets of high-quality papyrus. Once the copy was complete, the copy was returned to the original owner. The library kept the original scroll for its own collection. They even had a special note on the catalog entry, from the ships. This policy was a brilliant, if ethically dubious, way to build the collection. It vacuumed up knowledge from every corner of the known world, capturing rare texts from distant lands that might never have reached the book markets. It's a practice that historians have cheekily dubbed book napping, and it perfectly illustrates the ruthless efficiency of the Ptolemaic project. Of course, this also led to a thriving black market. Captains and sailors would go to great lengths to hide their precious scrolls, treating them like forbidden goods. You can picture a grizzled sea captain with a first edition of a Stoic philosophy text wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in a barrel of salted fish, praying the inspectors aren't too thorough. It's a slightly comical image, but it highlights the desperation of people trying to hold on to their personal property in the face of the state's insatiable hunger for information. Beyond these aggressive tactics, there was also a huge effort in translation. The Ptolemies weren't just interested in Greek texts. They understood the value of the knowledge held by other cultures. This is where the famous story of the Septuagint comes from. Ptolemy II Philadelphus, it is said, wanted a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible for the library. He allegedly gathered 72 Jewish scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, and brought them to Alexandria. He housed them in lavish comfort on the island of Pharos and tasked them with a translation. The legend says they all worked independently and miraculously produced 72 identical Greek translations. While the magical part of the story is likely a later embellishment, the core fact is solid. The library sponsored this monumental work of translation, which became hugely influential in the ancient world and is still a vital text for biblical scholarship today. Historians still argue whether the translation was commissioned for the library's Jewish population or for the Ptolemies' own universalist collection policy. But either way, it happened here. So, as you stand in this quiet hall, remember the journey these scrolls have taken. Some were purchased for a king's ransom. Some were borrowed and never returned. And some were pried from the hands of weary travelers at the port. The serene and scholarly atmosphere of the library is built upon a foundation of immense wealth, shrewd diplomacy, and a healthy dose of state-sponsored larceny. It was a dragnet for the human mind, and everything eventually was pulled into its net. Having seen how the scrolls got here, you now find yourself wondering about the people who spent their lives among them. What was it actually like to be one of the chosen few, a scholar in residence at the Great Mausoleum? You decide to follow one of them, a geographer named Eusebius, as he goes about his day. He's not a famous historical figure, just a typical mid-level academic, and through his routine, you get a glimpse into this unique and privileged existence. The day begins early. Eusebius wakes not in a cramped city apartment, but in his own comfortable private quarters within the royal quarter, just a short walk from the library itself. There's no rent to pay, no grocery bills to worry about. The first and most important perk of his job is that the king pays for everything. This economic freedom is the bedrock of life at the Mausoleum. It frees the scholars from the daily grind, allowing them to dedicate their entire existence to their intellectual pursuits. As one ancient poet, Timon of Phlius, sarcastically wrote, "In the populous land of Egypt, many are the bookish scribblers, fattened up in the birdcage of the muses, who quarrel endlessly." It's a cynical take, but it gets at a core truth. These scholars were, in essence, kept in a gilded cage, well-fed and cared for, expected to produce intellectual honey for their master after a simple breakfast of bread, dates, and a little watered wine. Eusebius heads not to the grand library halls you saw earlier, but to a smaller, more intimate study room reserved for senior fellows. Here, he has his own desk and access to the library's runners. He doesn't need to go to the shelves himself. He simply writes down the titles he needs on a wax tablet, and a young apprentice scurries off to the massive storerooms to retrieve the scrolls. It's like having a personalized, ancient version of an interlibrary loan system, but with a turnaround time of about 10 minutes. Today, Eusebius is working on a new map of the known world. He has a large sheet of papyrus spread out before him, weighted down at the corners with smooth stones. His primary source is a scroll containing the accounts of Pytheas, a Greek explorer who, a century earlier, had sailed out of the Mediterranean. and all the way to a mysterious land of cold and fog he called Thule, possibly Iceland or coastal Norway. Pytheas described the midnight sun and tides governed by the moon, ideas that were mocked by many as fantastical lies. But here, in the library, his account is preserved, waiting for a scholar like Ctesibius to study it. Beside that scroll, he has another, the campaign logs from Alexander's march to India, detailing rivers, mountains, and cities previously unknown to the Greeks. And next to that, a translation of an old Egyptian priestly text describing the seasonal flooding of the Nile. His work is a perfect example of what the library made possible. For the first time in history, a scholar could sit in one room and compare first-hand accounts from the frozen north with military reports from the Indus Valley and sacred texts from the heart of Africa. This synthesis of disparate sources was the library's true magic. It allowed for a bigger picture of the world to emerge, one that was more accurate and comprehensive than anything that had come before around midday. A bell chimes, signaling the communal lunch in the Cecession. Ctesibius carefully rolls up his scrolls and heads to the dining hall. The room is already buzzing with conversation. He finds a spot at a long table next to a physician who is excitedly talking about his latest dissection of a monkey's optic nerve, and across from a grammarian who is complaining loudly about the inconsistencies in Homeric verb forms. The food is simple but plentiful fish from the Nile, lentils, onions, cheese, and more bread. The real feast, however, is the conversation. It's a relentless, high-level intellectual free-for-all. Arguments are sharp, wit is prized, and plagiarism is the highest crime. Historians still argue whether this constant proximity led to more collaboration or more bitter rivalry. The answer is likely yes to both, with friendships and feuds forged over plates of stewed lentils. After lunch, many scholars, Ctesibius included, retreat to the peripatos, the covered walkway, to stroll and digest both their food and the morning's ideas. It was a core part of the Aristotelian tradition, the idea of peripatetic philosophy, or thinking while walking. You see a famous poet holding court, reciting his latest work from memory to a small crowd of admirers, who offer critiques and suggestions. It's a living, breathing peer review process. One of the quirky, less talked about aspects of this scholarly life was the complete lack of female scholars. The Mausian was an exclusively male institution, while Alexandria itself was a relatively progressive city where women had more rights than in, say, Athens. This inner sanctum of the intellect was a boys' club. However, that's not to say women were absent from the city's intellectual life. The most famous example, though she came much later, was Hypatia, a brilliant mathematician and philosopher. But she was an outsider, a teacher with her own school, not a state-sponsored fellow of the Mouseion. As the sun begins to dip lower, casting long shadows across the courtyards, Ctesibius returns to his study for a few more hours of work. He carefully adds a new coastline to his map, a river delta described in a newly acquired scroll from the ships. His work is slow, meticulous, and will likely never be seen by anyone outside this small circle of scholars. There are no bestseller lists, no royalties. The reward is the work itself, the respect of one's peers, and the continued patronage of the king. It was a strange, insular, and profoundly productive life, a life dedicated entirely to the quiet, tireless, and sometimes quarrelsome pursuit of knowledge, all lived out within the sunlit, marbled walls of this extraordinary place. Your exploration of Alexandria's intellectual heart isn't complete. While the great library within the Mausian was the prestigious, exclusive domain of sponsored scholars, the Ptolemies knew they needed something more. A city this large and diverse required more than just a cloistered think tank. You leave the refined air of the royal quarter and head southwest into the Rakotis district. This is the older, more Egyptian part of the city, a vibrant and crowded neighborhood that existed long before Alexander showed up. And here, standing on a prominent hill, you find the second, and in some ways more influential, of Alexandria's great libraries, the daughter library, housed within the magnificent temple complex known as the Serapeum. The building is impossible to miss. It sits atop a man-made acropolis, a raised platform accessed by a grand staircase of 100 steps. As you climb, the chaos of the surrounding city, the market cries, the clatter of workshops fades below you. The temple itself is a masterpiece of Greco-Egyptian cultural fusion. The scale and layout are Egyptian, grand and monumental, but the columns are Corinthian and the sculptural details are Greek. This blending was intentional, a physical manifestation of the god worshipped here, Serapis. Serapis was a god literally. Invented by Ptolemy, it was another one of his brilliant political moves. He needed a deity that could be worshipped by both his Greek and Egyptian subjects, a bridge between their two pantheons. So, he commissioned his priests and theologians to create one. They blended aspects of the Egyptian god of the underworld, Osiris, and the sacred Apis bull, with traits of Greek gods like Zeus, Hades, and Asclepius. The result was Serapis, a bearded, benevolent-looking deity who became wildly popular across the Mediterranean. The Serapeum was his primary temple, and it was a statement of cultural unity under Ptolemaic rule. As you reach the top of the stairs and enter the temple precinct, you see that it's a bustling public space. Unlike the serene, restricted Mausoleon, the Serapeum is open to a much wider audience. You see people from all walks of life, merchants making offerings, families seeking healing miracles from the god, and students milling about. The complex includes shrines, ceremonial halls, and priestly residences. And right there, off the main courtyard, is the entrance to the daughter library. This library was founded after the Great Library, likely by Ptolemy III, as a sort of public outreach branch. It served a different purpose. While the main library aimed for comprehensive collection and scholarly research, the daughter library was more of a public access and teaching collection. Historians still argue about its exact function, but the general consensus is that it held duplicates from the main collection and important foundational texts for students and the literate public. It was, in essence, the city's grand public. Lending library. You step inside. It's smaller than the great library halls, but still impressive. The same system of wall niches or armaria is used to store the scrolls. Estimates of its collection vary wildly, but a common figure mentioned by ancient writers is around 42,800 scrolls. These were likely core texts, the essential works of Homer, Plato, the Greek tragedians, and important handbooks on rhetoric, mathematics, and medicine. It was the ancient equivalent of a great books collection, a curated selection of the canon intended for broader education. You see young men, likely students from the city's philosophical schools, sitting at long tables, carefully copying passages from scrolls onto their own wax tablets. The atmosphere is less one of groundbreaking research and more one of diligent study. This is where a future doctor might get his first look at the Hippocratic corpus, or a future lawyer might study the fundamentals of Athenian law. This library also played a crucial role in the from the ships policy you learned about earlier. Some scholars believe that the Serapeum was the initial processing center for the confiscated books. The scrolls would be brought here first, copied, and then the original would be sent on to the Great Library, while the copy might be kept here for the public collection. It was an efficient, two-tiered system for disseminating knowledge. One of the more quirky things you notice in the courtyard of the Serapeum are the dream incubators. These were special chambers where worshippers would sleep, hoping that the god Serapis would visit them in their dreams and offer them a divine cure for an ailment or a solution to a problem. After waking, they would recount their dream to a priest who would interpret it for them. It's a fascinating blend of medicine, religion, and psychology. You can just imagine a student, after a long day of struggling with Euclidean geometry in the library, spending the night in one of these cells, hoping that God might just whisper the answer to problem number 5 in his sleep. The daughter library at the Serapeum, while often overshadowed by its more famous parent, was arguably more important to the daily life of the city. It was the intellectual hub for a generation of students, a place where knowledge was not just hoarded, but shared. It represented a democratization of learning, a step beyond the elite confines of the Mausian. For centuries, these two institutions worked in tandem. The great library as the research archive, the ultimate repository of world knowledge, and the daughter library as the circulating collection, the engine of public education. Together, they made Alexandria the undeniable center of learning. Standing here, in this bustling, more accessible space, you get a sense of how deeply the pursuit of knowledge permeated every level of Alexandrian society. You've seen the buildings, the scrolls, and the scholars. But what was the actual output of all this concentrated brain power? What revolutionary ideas were born from this unique ecosystem of patronage, collection, and debate? You return to the quiet halls of the Mausian, this time not to observe the process, but to witness the results. The discoveries made here didn't just add to the world's knowledge. They fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the cosmos, the planet, and even ourselves. That you find your way to the study of a man who, for a time, was the head librarian, Eratosthenes of Cyrene. He's a true polymath, a man whose interests leap from poetry to geography to mathematics without missing a beat. His colleagues, a little jealously, nicknamed him Beta, the second letter of the Greek alphabet, implying he was the second best at everything. But they also called him Pentathlos, the name for an athlete who competes in 5 different events, a nod to his incredible range. Today, however, he's not writing poetry. He's staring at a papyrus scroll that contains a simple, curious observation sent in from a correspondent in Syene, a city in southern Egypt, near modern-day Aswan. The observation is this: in Syene, on the day of the summer solstice, at noon, the sun is directly overhead. An upright stick casts no shadow. The sunlight shines directly down to the bottom of a deep well. This tidbit of information, which most would dismiss as a local curiosity, sparks a flash of genius in Eratosthenes. He knows that here in Alexandria, on the very same day, and at the very same time, a stick does cast a shadow. He measures the angle of that shadow and finds it to be about 7.2 degrees, or 1/50th of a full circle. Now comes the brilliant leap. If the sun's rays are assumed to be parallel, a reasonable assumption given its great distance, then the only way a stick in Alexandria and a stick in Syene can cast different shadows at the same moment is if the Earth's surface is curved. The difference in the shadow's angle must correspond to the curvature of the Earth between the two cities. All he needs now is the distance between Alexandria and Syene. This was a known trade route, and the distance had been measured by professional walkers or bemetista who are trained to walk in precise equal steps. The distance was about 5,000 stadia. He does the math. If the distance of 5,000 stadia corresponds to 1/50th of a full circle, then the total circumference of the Earth must be 50 times 5,000, which is 250,000 stadia, the exact length of the ancient Greek stadion is a subject of intense scholarly debate, so we can't be sure exactly how accurate he was. But most estimates put his calculation to within 1% to 15% of the actual value we know today. Think about that. In the 3rd century BC, using only a stick, its shadow, in a piece of second-hand information from the library's correspondence. A man calculated the circumference of our planet with astonishing accuracy. It's one of the most elegant and beautiful experiments in human history, and it happened right here. But the genius doesn't stop there. You wander into another workshop and find a man named Hero of Alexandria. Though he lived a bit later, his work is a direct product of the library's environment. He's tinkering with a strange metal sphere mounted on a boiler over a fire. It has two bent nozzles pointing in opposite directions. As the water boils, steam travels up into the sphere and jets out of the nozzles, causing the sphere to spin rapidly. He calls it an eolipile. It is, for all intents and purposes, the world's first steam engine. To Hero, it was just a novelty, a temple wonder used to demonstrate the power of air and steam, perhaps to make temple doors open magically. He never thought to hook it up to a cart or a mill. The idea of using it for practical labor just wasn't part of the Greco-Roman mindset, which relied heavily on animal and human muscle. But the principle, the fundamental concept of steam power, was born in this workshop. In the medical wing, you see the legacy of Aristotle's, the father of anatomy. Because of the Ptolemy's willingness to permit human dissection, he was the first person to systematically describe the nervous system, distinguishing between motor and sensory nerves. He identified the brain, not the heart, as the seat of intelligence. He described the valves of the heart, the retina of the eye, and the duodenum of the small intestine, a name he coined and we still use today. Almost every foundational fact of anatomy you learned in high school biology has its roots in the bloody, controversial, but revolutionary work done in this building. You also see the quirky side of invention. In one corner, a tinkerer is perfecting a water clock or clepsydra with an elaborate system of gears and siphons to make it the most accurate timekeeping device of its age. In another, an engineer is designing a water organ, the hydraulis, which uses water pressure to force air through pipes, creating music. It's the ancestor of the modern pipe organ. And then there's the truly strange stuff, automata, early robots. The same Hero of Alexandria designed a puppet theater that was entirely automated by a system of falling weights, strings, and rotating cylinders. It could roll itself onto a stage, perform a short play with moving figures, and then roll itself off. It was ancient animatronics, a testament to a level of mechanical and engineering skill that most people assume is a modern invention. This is the true legacy of the library. It wasn't just a warehouse for old books. It was a crucible where old knowledge was forged into new discoveries. By gathering the world's information under one roof, it created a critical mass of ideas, allowing scholars to connect dots that had never been connected before. The circumference of the Earth, the blueprint for a steam engine, the map of the human nervous system, all of it was discovered here, not in a flash of isolated genius, but through the slow, patient work of synthesizing the knowledge held on countless fragile scrolls. You've been surrounded by tens of thousands of scrolls, the fundamental units of knowledge in this ancient world. You've seen them on shelves, on desks, being carried by apprentices. But you pause and look closely at one, truly seeing it. For the first time, what is this thing really? This fragile medium that carries the weight of history, poetry, and science? To understand the library, you have to understand the papyrus scroll, the technology that made it all possible. You decide to trace its journey from a green reed growing in the Nile mud to a finished product on a library shelf. Your journey starts a little outside the city, in the marshy wetlands along the banks of the Nile Delta. Here, vast fields of papyrus grow wild, their tall, thick triangular stalks topped with a feathery spray of leaves. It's a plant that is synonymous with Egypt, a gift of the river that provides not just the raw material for paper, but also food, medicine, and material for boats and sandals. You watch as a team of laborers wade into the shallow water, slicing the green stalks near the base and bundling them into large sheaves. This is the harvest. The fresh stalks are brought to a workshop in the city, a place with a distinct, damp, slightly sweet smell. Here, the outer green rind is peeled away, revealing the starchy white pith inside. This pith is the magic ingredient. A craftsman lays a stalk on a wooden board and with a long, thin knife carefully slices the pith into translucent, ribbon-like strips, as thin as he can possibly make them. This is a skilled job. The uniformity of the strips is crucial for the quality of the final sheet. Next comes the assembly. On a flat, wet surface, a worker lays down a row of these papyrus strips, side by side, their edges slightly overlapping. This is the first layer. Then, they place a second layer on top, but with the strips running at a right angle to the first, creating a cross-hatched pattern, like a primitive form of plywood. This two-ply structure is what will give the finished sheet its strength and flexibility. The whole wet mat is then covered with a cloth and put under pressure, either hammered gently with a wooden mallet or squeezed in a heavy press. The pressure and the natural, glue-like sap of the plant itself are all that's needed to fuse the strips together into a single, cohesive sheet. No external glue is required. After being pressed, the sheets are set out in the hot Egyptian sun to dry. Once dry, they are trimmed to a standard size and polished. A worker will take a smooth stone, a piece of ivory, or a shell, and rub the surface of the sheet vigorously. This burnishing process closes the pores of the papyrus, creating a smooth, hard surface that is ideal for writing on, preventing the ink from bleeding or feathering. But one sheet isn't a book. To create a scroll, or a biblos, these individual sheets, called kolemata, are glued together, edge to edge, to form a low roll. A standard scroll would typically consist of about 20 sheets, creating a document that could be anywhere from 3 to 6 meters long when fully unrolled, though some could be much, much longer. The longest surviving papyrus scroll, the Great Harris Papyrus, is over 41 meters long. That's almost the length of an Olympic swimming pool. Imagine trying to find a specific passage in that. There was no Control-F in ancient Alexandria. There was only patient, careful unrolling to make the scroll easier to handle. Wooden rods, called amphaloi, navels, were often attached to each end. The reader would unroll from one rod while rolling up with the other, exposing only a single column of text at a time. To protect the scroll when it was stored, it was often placed in a leather or cloth jacket, and the little papyrus tag you saw earlier, the syllabos, was attached, hanging out so a librarian could identify the contents without having to unroll. The ink, known as black carbon ink, was also a local product. It was made by mixing soot, usually scraped from the bottom of cooking pots or collected from oil lamps, with a binder like gum arabic, which comes from the acacia tree. This mixture was dried into a small cake. To write, a scribe would just dip a wet reed pen into the cake, much like using a modern watercolor set. This ink was remarkably stable, non-acidic, and is the reason so many ancient texts that survived the centuries are still perfectly legible. Historians still argue about the precise recipes for ink, as some seem to have included metallic components like lead, which suggests a constant process of experimentation and refinement. Now, consider the fragility of this medium. Papyrus is vulnerable to everything. It thrives in the dry climate of Egypt, but in the dampness of Europe, it rots and turns to dust. It's susceptible to insects, mold, and of course, fire. Every single scroll in the Great Library was a patient, handcrafted object, the delicate vessel for the thoughts it contained. And this fragility is key to understanding the tragedy of its loss. We aren't just talking about the loss of information, but the loss of hundreds of thousands of unique, handmade artifacts, each one representing hours of skilled labor, from the harvesters in the marshes to the polishers in the workshop and the scribes in the scriptorium. The entire intellectual output of the ancient world was written on dried, pressed reeds, an empire of thought built on a mountain of processed swamp grass. And as you hold a fresh, blank scroll in your hands, feeling its light, slightly brittle texture, you realize just how precarious that empire truly was. You've seen the library's vast collection, a sea of papyrus containing, in theory, all of human knowledge. But a collection of that size, hundreds of thousands of scrolls, is completely useless without one crucial thing: a system of organization. A mountain of books is just a fire hazard if you can't find what you're looking for. How did they navigate this ocean of text? You now turn your attention to the unsung heroes of the library, the catalogers, the brilliant minds who turned a chaotic hoard into a functional archive, and in doing so, invented the very discipline of bibliography. At the heart of this colossal effort is one man, Callimachus of Cyrene. He was a poet, a critic, and for a time, a librarian at Alexandria under Ptolemy II. He was a towering intellectual figure, famous for his elegant, witty poetry and his notoriously prickly personality. He famously declared, "A big book is a big evil," a sentiment that suggests he preferred quality over quantity, or rather arctic stance for someone working in the world's largest library. But it was this sharp, analytical mind that was perfectly suited to the monumental task of organizing it. You find Callimachus not in a grand hall, but in a dusty workroom, surrounded by stacks of newly acquired scrolls. His task is to create a comprehensive, systematic catalog of every single scroll in the library's collection. The result of his life's work would be a legendary text known as the Pinax, which translates to tables or lists. The Pinax itself is now lost, one of the most heartbreaking losses of all, but we know what it was from descriptions by later writers. It was nothing less than the first library card catalog in history, and it was a work of genius. You watch his process. He takes a scroll, unrolls the first few feet, and begins to analyze it. First, the author. Who wrote this? If the author's name is on the scroll, great. If not, his work begins. He has to become a literary detective, comparing the style of writing to known works, consulting other sources, making an educated guess. He notes down the author's name and a brief biographical sketch, where they were from, who their father was, who their teachers were, and any famous anecdotes about them. This contextual information was considered essential. Next, the title. Many ancient works didn't have formal titles as we know them today. They were often known by their first line, or incipit. Callimachus had to regularize these, creating a standard title for each work so it could be consistently identified. Then, he would classify the work by genre. And this is where his brilliance truly shines. He didn't just create a few broad categories. He developed a sophisticated hierarchical system. The entire body of knowledge was first divided into major divisions: rhetoric, law, epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, history, medicine, mathematics, natural science, and miscellaneous. Within each division, all the authors were listed alphabetically. This simple alphabetical organization was revolutionary for its time. It was a rational, objective system that broke from the old methods of organizing by chronology or perceived importance. Under each author's name, he would list all of their known works, also alphabetically. For each work, he would provide summary or a critical comment, and he would quote the first line of the text to ensure positive identification. Finally, and most crucially for the librarians, he would note the total number of lines in the scroll. This was the ancient equivalent of noting the page count, and it helped in tracking different versions and ensuring a copy was complete. The final entry for a single work in the this Pinax might look something like this, in translation: Euripides, son of Mnesarchus of Athens, tragedian, works, Medea, begins, would that the Argo had not flown its course, 1419 lines. The Pinax itself reportedly filled 120 scrolls. It was a massive bibliographic encyclopedia, a roadmap to the entire literary and scientific landscape of the Greek world. It didn't just tell you what the library had, it defined the canon. To be included in the Pinax was to be immortalized. To be left out was to risk fading into obscurity. Historians still argue about the full extent of the Pinax. Was it a catalog of just the Alexandrian collection? Or was it a comprehensive survey of all of Greek literature, whether the library owned a copy or not? Most scholars lean towards the former, but its influence was so immense that it became the definitive guide to the field. You also see the other, less glamorous side of this work: arguments. So many arguments. The library was a hotbed of scholarly debate, and nowhere was it fiercer than in matters of attribution and authenticity. Imagine two grammarians on the verge of a fistfight over whether a particular line in the Iliad was a later addition by an Athenian editor or part of the original oral tradition. These weren't just academic squabbles. They were battles for the integrity of the text. The scholars at Alexandria were pioneers of textual criticism. They would compare multiple copies of the same work, remember the from the ship's policy, and note variations in the margins. They developed a set of critical symbols to mark questionable passages, spurious lines, or structural problems. They were, in essence, the first editors, striving to create a definitive, clean version of the classics. This meticulous, often tedious work of Callimachus and his colleagues is what transformed the library from a mere seer collection into a usable research tool. Without the Pinax, Eratosthenes might never have found the note about the well in Syene. Without the critical editions, future generations would have been reading a garbled version of Homer. The quiet, intellectual labor of cataloging and editing is the invisible scaffolding that holds up the entire edifice of knowledge. It's not as dramatic as calculating the Earth's circumference, but it is, in every way, just as important. For over a century, the Library of Alexandria thrived in a golden age of royal patronage and intellectual freedom. It seemed like a permanent feature of the world, a stable center in a turbulent age. But no golden age lasts forever. You are now in the year 145 BC, and a dark chill is settling over the sun-drenched courtyards of the Mausian. The era of enlightened rulers is over. The new king on the throne is Ptolemy VIII Euergetes II, a man so famously bloated and cruel that the people of Alexandria gave him the vicious nickname Physcon, or Potbelly, and he is about to bring the party to a violent, screeching halt. Physcon's rise to power was complicated and bloody, involving a bitter rivalry with his brother, Ptolemy VI. When he finally secured sole rule of Egypt, he initiated a brutal purge of anyone he suspected of having supported his rivals. His paranoia and cruelty knew no bounds. He targeted the intellectual elite of Alexandria with particular venom. He saw the scholars of the Mausian not as a cultural treasure, but as a nest of dissenters, a group of privileged, free-thinking men who had enjoyed the favor of his hated brother. He viewed their intellectual independence as a political threat. Are standing in the main dining hall of the Mausian, but the lively chatter you heard before is gone. The air is thick with fear. Soldiers, loyal to Physcon, stand guard at the entrances. The scholars who remain speak in hushed, nervous whispers, their eyes constantly darting towards the door. Many of their colleagues have already disappeared, arrested on trumped-up charges, imprisoned, or worse. The atmosphere of open debate and fearless inquiry has evaporated, replaced by one of suspicion and terror. This is the beginning of the end, the first major blow from which the great library would never fully recover. Physkon initiated a mass expulsion of the scholars. Almost every leading intellectual in Alexandria who could flee did. Aristarchus of Samothrace, the head librarian and the era's foremost Homeric scholar, fled to Cyprus, where he soon died. The grammarians, the philosophers, the physicians, the mathematicians, they scattered across the Mediterranean, seeking refuge in cities like Rhodes, Pergamum, and Athens. An ancient writer, Athenaius, provides a bitter summary of the event. The king exiled all the intellectuals, philologists, philosophers, mathematicians, musicians, painters, trainers, physicians, and many other men of skill. And so these refugees, now reduced to poverty, taught what they knew to whomever they could all over the Greek world. It was a catastrophic brain drain. Physkon had, in a single stroke, dismantled the human infrastructure of the library. He had decapitated the institution, leaving the body, the scrolls, the buildings, without its mind. He replaced the exiled luminaries with his own cronies, men chosen for their political loyalty rather than their intellectual merit. The head of the library was no longer a world-renowned scholar, but a high-ranking military officer, a man named Siddas, one of the king's guards. You watch as these new, government-appointed scholars walk the colonnades. They are arrogant and uninterested, treating the library not as a sacred trust, but as a political prize. The vital work of the institution grinds to a halt. There are no more spirited debates in the dining hall. No new groundbreaking calculations in the observatories. The meticulous work of copying, editing, and cataloging slows to a crawl. The flow of new acquisitions, once the lifeblood of the library, dwindles. Why would anyone send their precious scrolls to a place where intellectuals were persecuted? This event marks a crucial turning point. The library's decline wasn't initially about fire or destruction, but about a change in values. The early Ptolemies, for all their political maneuvering, genuinely valued scholarship, or at least its prestige. Physkon valued only loyalty and power. He broke the sacred contract between the ruler and the scholar. Historians still argue about Physkon's long-term impact. Some believe the institution bounced back after his death, while others see this moment as the fatal wound, the point at which the library's spirit was broken, even if its body lingered on. There's a quirky and rather grim tidbit associated with Physkon's reign that illustrates his character. According to some sources, he married his brother's widow, Cleopatra II, who was also his own sister. Remember, Ptolemaic family trees are less of a tree and more of a tangled wreath. Then, on their wedding day, he had her young son, his own nephew and the rightful heir, murdered in his mother's arms. He was a man of spectacular cruelty, and his attack on the Mouseion was just one facet of his reign of terror. The great diaspora of scholars had an unintended side effect. While it was a disaster for Alexandria, it was a boon for the rest of the Hellenistic world. The exiled intellectuals founded new schools and revitalized old ones, spreading the Alexandrian model of scholarship far and wide. It was like smashing a lantern. The light was no longer concentrated in one brilliant point, but was scattered into 100 smaller flames across the sea. The idea of the library, the methods of textual criticism and systematic research, began to take root elsewhere. Here, in Alexandria, the damage was done. The scrolls still line the shelves, and marble columns still gleam in the sun, but the place feels like a ghost of its former self. It's a powerful lesson that a library is more than its collection. It's a living community of people. You can have all the books in the world, but if you chase away the readers, the thinkers, and the creators, all you have left is a beautiful silent tomb. And as you walk out of the Mouseion, leaving the fearful quiet behind, You sense that this is not a temporary setback. It's the beginning of a long, slow twilight. You jump forward in time, about a century after Physkon's purge. The library has limped on, a shadow of its former self, but still a potent symbol and a significant collection. The political landscape has shifted dramatically. The Ptolemaic dynasty is in its final decadent throes, embodied by its last ruler, Cleopatra VII, and a new, formidable power is casting its long shadow over the entire Mediterranean, Rome. You find yourself in the heart of Alexandria in 48 BC, and the city is a war zone. The air, usually thick with the scent of spices and papyrus, is now choked with the smoke of burning buildings. This is the setting for the most famous and most misunderstood event in the library's history, the fire of Julius Caesar. For centuries, the common story has been a simple one. Julius Caesar, in his battle for control of the city, carelessly burned the great library to the ground, single-handedly destroying the wisdom of the ancient world. It's a dramatic, tragic tale with a clear villain. But as you stand on a rooftop overlooking the harbor, the reality you see on the ground is far more complicated and confusing. The blame is not so easy to assign. Here's the situation. Caesar has arrived in Alexandria in pursuit of his rival, Pompey the Great, only to find Pompey has already been assassinated on the orders of Cleopatra's younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII. Caesar, never one to waste a crisis, decides to settle the Egyptian civil war himself, siding with the charismatic Cleopatra. This intervention backfires. The forces loyal to Ptolemy XIII, led by the general Achilles, lay siege to Caesar and his heavily outnumbered Roman legions. Trapping them in the royal quarter by the harbor. Caesar is in a desperate position. The Egyptian fleet controls the port, threatening to cut off his supplies and reinforcements. In a bold and ruthless move to gain control of the docks, Caesar orders his men to set fire to the Egyptian ships anchored in the harbor. You can see the flames from your vantage point, leaping from ship to ship, a terrifying wall of fire consuming the wooden vessels. The heat is intense, even from a distance, and the sound is a horrifying roar of cracking timber and screaming men. The fire is a military success. The enemy fleet is neutralized, but the wind coming off the sea is strong. It whips the flames from the harbor inland, carrying sparks and burning embers over the walls and into the city. The fire spreads to the warehouses and buildings along the docks, and this is where the disaster and the confusion begins. Some of those buildings near the harbor almost certainly contain scrolls. Remember the "from the ships" policy? The library had storerooms and annexes near the port to process new acquisitions. The Roman philosopher Seneca, writing a century later, famously stated that 40,000 scrolls were burned in this fire. But he doesn't explicitly say it was the great library itself. He describes scrolls in storehouses, Horia, being destroyed. So what actually burned? Was it the main library building within the Mausoleum complex? Or was it a massive warehouse full of scrolls, perhaps books created for export or recently confiscated texts waiting to be cataloged? Or was it a combination of both? Historians have been fighting about this for centuries. It is the single most debated event in the library's history. From your perspective, it's impossible to tell for sure. The smoke is too thick, the chaos too great. The royal quarter, where the main library is located, is a sprawling complex. The fire is clearly raging at its edge, near the water, but does it reach the heart of the Mausoleum? The ancient accounts are frustratingly vague and contradictory. The scholar and geographer Strabo was in Alexandria just a couple of decades after the fire, and in his detailed description of the city and the Mausoleum, he fails to mention any catastrophic fire damage to the main library at all. He speaks of the Mausoleum as a thriving institution. This has led many modern historians to believe that the Great Library itself, the architectural marvel you walked through earlier, survived Caesar's fire largely intact. The scrolls that burned, they argue, were in a separate warehouse. But the damage, even if it wasn't the total destruction of legend, was still devastating. 40,000 scrolls is a cataclysmic loss of knowledge, equivalent to thousands of modern books vanishing in an instant. It was a brutal blow, a significant wound to the collection. The quirky fringe theory on this is that some Roman writers, like Seneca, may have exaggerated the scale of the fire to make Caesar seem less like a clumsy arsonist and more like a tragic figure caught in the fog of war, or even to make the Romans look more impressive for having destroyed such a famous treasure. You see Cleopatra, after securing her throne with Caesar's help, trying to make amends. Later, her Roman lover, Mark Antony, would reportedly gift her 200,000 scrolls from the rival library of Pergamum to help restock Alexandria's collection. This story, if true, suggests two things. First, that there was still a functioning library to restock, and second, that the collection had indeed suffered a grievous loss that needed replenishing. The story of Caesar's fire is a perfect example of how history gets simplified into a neat, dramatic narrative. The truth is messier. It wasn't a deliberate act of cultural vandalism. It was an act of war with catastrophic and likely unintended consequences. It didn't destroy the library completely, but it wounded it severely. The fire of 48 BC wasn't the final death blow, but it was a major violent episode in what would be a long, slow process of decline. The library, like a patient suffering a major trauma, would live on, but it would carry the scars of this day forever. The smoke from Caesar's fire has long cleared, and the story of that one dramatic event has been etched into popular memory as the cause of the library's demise. But as you drift through the centuries that follow, moving from the reign of Augustus to the crisis of the 3rd century, you realize that the real story is much sadder and far less dramatic. The library didn't die in a single glorious blaze. It died a slow, undignified death by 1,000 cuts. It was a long, agonizing decline brought on by budget cuts, political instability, imperial neglect, and a profound shift in the cultural priorities of the world it inhabited. You are now in the Roman period. Egypt is no longer the seat of a proud dynasty, but a province of the Roman Empire, little more than a personal breadbasket for the emperor. Alexandria is still a great city, but its status has changed. It's no longer the center of a Hellenistic kingdom, but just another major hub in a vast Roman-dominated world. The emperors in Rome have little sentimental attachment to the Ptolemaic legacy. They don't share the early Ptolemies' obsession with making Alexandria the intellectual capital of the world. Rome, they believe, is the center of the world. The first and most persistent cut is financial. The generous state funding that was the lifeblood of the Mauseion begins to dry up. Remember the tax exemptions, the free room and board, the handsome stipends for scholars? Under Roman rule, these are gradually curtailed. The budget for acquiring new scrolls shrinks to a pittance. The grand project of obtaining every book in the world is quietly abandoned. The library shifts from a dynamic, growing entity to a static archive, struggling just to maintain what it already has. The staff of scribes, translators, and librarians is reduced. Leaky roofs take longer to fix. The constant, patient work of recopying aging and damaged scrolls an essential task, given the fragility of papyrus falls behind. You walk through the halls of the Mauseion during the reign of, say, Emperor Caracalla in 215 AD. The place feels tired. Dust motes dance in the faded light. There are fewer scholars, and those who remain seem less vibrant, more like caretakers of a museum than pioneers on the frontier of knowledge. Caracalla, in a fit of rage at the Alexandrians for mocking him, actually abolishes the scholars' stipends. Altogether, expels all foreign scholars and executes many of the city's prominent citizens. It's a brutal, thuggish act, another echo of Physkond's purge, and another blow to the institution's prestige and function. The funding is later restored, but the damage is done. The message is clear. The scholar's existence is subject to the whims of an often hostile imperial power. Beyond neglect, there is physical destruction, but it's piecemeal, not a single event. The city of Alexandria becomes a frequent battleground. In the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire is racked by civil war and breakaway movements. In one such conflict, around 272 AD, the Emperor Aurelian attacks the forces of the Palmyrene Queen Zenobia, who had conquered Egypt. The fighting is fiercest. In the Bruchion, the old royal quarter, where the Mouseion and the Great Library are located. Ancient sources describe this part of the city as being completely devastated, turned into a wasteland. You stand in the ruins of the royal quarter after Aurelian's reconquest. The gleaming white marble colonnades are now shattered, blackened stumps. The gardens are trampled and burned. It's highly unlikely that the main library building, the original heart of the Ptolemaic Mouseion, could have survived this level of urban warfare. This, more than Caesar's fire, was likely the true physical end of the Great Library. There was no single famous fire, just the grinding, anonymous destruction of war. Historians still argue intensely over this, but many believe that by the end of the 3rd century, the institution known as the Great Library of the Mouseion simply no longer existed as a functioning entity. Its buildings were likely rubble, and its surviving scrolls, if any, had probably been moved to safer, smaller locations like the daughter library at the Serapeum. There's also a cultural shift happening. The classical Greek intellectual tradition, with its emphasis on logic, debate, and secular inquiry, is beginning to wane. New ways of thinking, particularly mystical philosophies and new salvationist religions like Christianity, are on the rise. The questions people are asking are changing. They are becoming less concerned with calculating the circumference of the earth and more concerned with the nature of God and the path to eternal life. The library, a monument to the old way of thinking, begins to seem less relevant, a relic of a bygone age. One slightly quirky fringe idea is that the library may have also suffered from an internal crisis of knowledge. After centuries of collecting and commentary, some argue that scholarship became scholasticism endless, repetitive commentary on the same classic texts rather than bold new inquiry. The institution became a victim of its own success, drowning in its own data, with scholars spending more time arguing about the footnotes of old books than writing new ones. The death of the library wasn't a murder. It was a slow, systemic failure. It was the loss of funding, the political violence, the urban warfare, the slow decay of its physical materials, and a gradual erosion of the cultural values that created it. It's a less satisfying story than the tale of Caesar's fire, but it's a more realistic one. Great institutions rarely die in a single traumatic moment. They fade away, piece by piece, until one day people look around and realize they're gone. And by the 4th century, the great dream of the Ptolemies, the Mouseion, was gone. But its daughter, the library at the Serapeum, was about to have its own final, very dramatic day. The Great Library of the Mouseion is likely a ruin, its collections scattered or destroyed. But the idea of the library lives on, concentrated in its more public and resilient offspring, the daughter library at the Serapeum. You now find yourself in the year 391 AD. The world has been irrevocably transformed. The Roman Empire is now officially a Christian empire. The old gods Zeus, Jupiter, and the Greco-Egyptian Serapis himself are now decried as pagan demons. The intellectual climate is no longer one of syncretic curiosity, but of fierce, often violent, religious orthodoxy. You are about to witness the symbolic, brutal end of the classical world's intellectual tradition. You are standing in the crowded Rakotis district, part of a huge, agitated mob surging up the grand 100-step staircase towards the Serapeum. The crowd is a mix of zealous monks in rough-spun robes, Christian common folk, and city toughs just looking for a fight. They are chanting prayers and waving crosses, their faces alight with a righteous fury. They are being led by Theophilus, the city's powerful and politically ambitious patriarch, or archbishop. He is a man who sees the lingering pagan traditions as a direct challenge to his authority and the authority of the church. The Serapeum, the most magnificent pagan temple left in the city, is his primary target. The conflict had been simmering for weeks. Theophilus had been given permission by the Emperor Theodosius, the first to convert a disused pagan temple into a church. During the renovation, his followers discovered secret underground caverns containing pagan artifacts, which Theophilus then paraded through the streets to mock and ridicule the pagans. This public humiliation enraged the pagan community, a small, but still influential group of philosophers and traditionalists. They retaliated, sparking street brawls that escalated into a full-blown crisis. The pagans, led by a philosopher named Olympius, barricaded themselves inside the mighty Serapeum complex, using it as a fortress. From their fortified position, they launched raids into the Christian quarters of the city, capturing Christians, torturing them, and sometimes forcibly converting them to the worship of Serapis. It was a desperate, violent last stand. You can see the remnants of this struggle on the steps as you ascend bloodstains, discarded weapons. The situation grew so dire that the emperor himself had to intervene. He issued an edict offering a pardon to the pagans for their crimes, but on one condition: the Serapeum, the source of the conflict, was to be demolished. This imperial decree is what has unleashed the mob you are now a part of. It's not just a riot. It's a state-sanctioned act of cultural demolition. As the crowd pours into the temple precinct, the few remaining pagan defenders melt away, knowing the fight is lost. The crowd's first target is the colossal cult statue of Serapis. It's a magnificent work of art, said to be made of precious woods and inlaid with ivory, gold, and silver. There's a legend that a prophecy foretold that if the statue were ever harmed, the sky would fall and the world would end. The crowd hesitates for a moment, a flicker of ancient fear running through them. Then, a single soldier, encouraged by Theophilus, takes an axe and with a mighty swing smashes it into the statue's knee. The crowd holds its breath. Nothing happens. The sky does not fall. A great shear erupts, breaking the spell of the old god forever. The mob then falls upon the statue with axes and ropes, hacking it to pieces, dragging the fragments through the city to be burned. Once the idol is destroyed, the destructive energy of the crowd turns to the rest of the complex. With a terrifying roar, they surge towards the colonnades that house the daughter library. This is the moment history remembers. They are not specifically hunting for scrolls or knowledge. To them, the library is simply another part of this detestable pagan temple. It is guilty by association. They swarm into the halls you once saw filled with diligent students. They pull the scrolls from their niches, ripping the papyrus, shattering. The storage chests dot. It's a scene of pure chaos. A lifetime of work by a scholar is undone in seconds. A unique copy of a lost play is used to start a bonfire in the courtyard. A priceless work of history is torn to shreds by someone who can't even read its title. It's an orgy of destruction, fueled by a religious fervor that sees these books not as knowledge, but as heresy. Not as wisdom, but as the work of the devil. The meticulous order of Callimachus's system is consumed by the anarchic fury of the mob. Historians still debate the extent of the destruction. How many scrolls were actually in the Serapeum library at this late date? Had the collection already been depleted by years of neglect? Some modern scholars suggest the library may have been mostly empty by 391 AD, its collection long since decayed or moved. The Christian historian Socrates of Constantinople, writing a generation later, describes the event in detail but doesn't even mention a library. In contrast, the pagan historian Eunapius laments the destruction bitterly. This is a classic case of history being written by the victors and the losers, but whether the shelves were full or half empty is almost beside the point. The destruction of the Serapeum was a profoundly symbolic act. It was the final violent punctuation mark on the long sentence of the library's decline. This wasn't a slow death by budget cuts. This was a murder in broad daylight. It represented the victory of a new, intolerant worldview over the syncretic, curious spirit of the Hellenistic age that had given birth to the library in the first place. As you watch the smoke rise from the smoldering ruins of the temple and its library, you are witnessing more than just the burning of books. You are witnessing the end of a world. The ruins of the Serapeum are still smoking, a grim monument to the violent clash of ideologies. A great project that began with the ambition of Ptolemy has ended in rubble and ash. Now, in the aftermath, the true weight of the loss begins to settle in. It's an absence, a vast, silent void in the history of human thought. To truly comprehend the tragedy, you must try to imagine not the scrolls that survived, but the ghosts of the ones that were lost forever. You sit down amidst the scattered, burned scraps of papyrus and mourn the specific, irreplaceable worlds that vanished. What exactly did we lose? We can never know for sure, but by piecing together fragments, quotes, and references from the works that did survive, scholars have created a haunting catalog of the library's missing treasures. This isn't just about old books. It's about entire branches of knowledge, complete literary canons, and eyewitness accounts of history that are now gone. Think of literature. We have 7 surviving plays by the great tragedian Aeschylus. We know from the Pinanx and other records that he wrote at least 90. We have lost more than 90% of his life's work. What masterpieces of human drama, what profound insights into justice and fate were in those 83 missing plays. Sophocles, the author of Oedipus Rex, wrote over 120 plays. Again, only 7 survive. Euripides fared slightly better, with 19 survivors out of about 92. We are left with a mere fraction of the golden age of Athenian theater, like watching a season of a brilliant TV show where only a few random episodes have been preserved. We also lost almost the entire body of Greek lyric poetry, save for a few lucky fragments. The works of Sappho, the brilliant poetess from Lesbos, whose writing was so revered she was called the 10th Muse, existed in a 9-volume edition in the library. Today, we have only one complete poem and a collection of tantalizing, heartbreaking. Scraps.history is perhaps the most painful loss. You imagine picking up a scroll written by Berossus, a Babylonian priest who, in the 3rd century BC, wrote a complete, multi-volume history on Mesopotamia in Greek, drawing upon cuneiform records, stretching back thousands of years. It contained king lists, temple archives, and the original detailed versions of the myths that we only know from later, garbled accounts. It is gone, all of it. We lost the complete 144-book history of the Roman Republic by Livy. Only 35 books survive. We lost the histories of Timaeus, the work that standardized the Greek system of dating by Olympiads. We lost the first-hand accounts of Alexander the Great's campaigns written by his own generals, Ptolemy I and Nearchusman, who are actually there. We are left instead with histories written centuries later by authors like Arrian, who were themselves relying on these now vanished primary sources. We are reading a copy of a memory. The scientific losses are staggering. You think of the astronomical catalogue of Hipparchus, the greatest astronomer of antiquity. He created a comprehensive star chart with the positions and magnitudes of over 850 stars, discovered the precession of the equinoxes, and developed trigonometric tables. His work was the foundation of astronomy for the next 1,500 years, but his original writings are gone. We know of them almost exclusively because they were quoted and used by Claudius Ptolemy, a later Alexandrian astronomer, no relation to the kings in his Almagest. What nuances, what other discoveries were lost? We lost the anatomical works of Erasistratus, who came so close to discovering the circulation of blood 1,800 years before William Harvey. Remember Hero of Alexandria and his steam engine? He also wrote treatises on mechanics, pneumatics, and automata, most of which are lost. We have the table of contents, but the books themselves have vanished. There are the quirky, tantalizing losses that fire the imagination. What about the cookbook of Apicius, which we have in a later, messy Roman version? The original, more complete Greek culinary texts it was based on were almost certainly in the library. What recipes for sauces, what techniques for cooking exotic fish from the Red Sea have been lost to time? Remember Ctesias, a Greek physician who wrote a book on India? It was said to be full of wild, fantastical stories of dog-headed men and giant gold-digging ants. While modern historians consider him notoriously unreliable, his work was a fascinating look at how the Greeks viewed the mysterious East. The complete text is gone, leaving only a summary by a later Byzantine scholar. Historians still argue whether his fantastic beasts were misunderstood descriptions of real animals, like Tibetan marmots or macaques, or pure invention. The loss of the library created a great filter in our knowledge of the ancient world. The works that survived did so through a combination of luck, popularity, and the biases of the medieval monks who did the copying. They preserved the philosophers they found useful, Plato, Aristotle, and the poets they found foundational, Homer, Virgil, but vast swaths of everything else were allowed to rot. The library's destruction didn't just rob us of answers. It robbed us of the questions. It skewed our perception of the past, making it seem more monolithic, more homogeneous than it actually was. We are left with the winners of history, the approved canon, while the voices of the dissenters, the weirdos, the losers, and the forgotten geniuses are overwhelmingly silent. Standing in the ruins, you feel the profound, echoing silence of those lost voices, a library of ghosts whispering stories we will now never hear. The ghosts of the lost scrolls fade, and the smoke of the Serapeum riot clears, giving way to the passage of more than 1,600 years. You find yourself back in the present day, standing on the waterfront of modern Alexandria. The city is a bustling, sprawling metropolis, a cacophony of car horns and modern life. The ancient royal quarter is buried deep beneath layers of concrete and steel. The exact location of the original Mausoleum is lost to time, a subject of endless archaeological speculation. The ancient world feels impossibly distant, a half-remembered dream. And yet, the idea of the library, the ambition of the Ptolemies, has refused to die. It has lingered in the collective consciousness of humanity, a powerful symbol of our highest aspirations and our most tragic failures. Right here, on the Corniche, overlooking the same Mediterranean harbor where the book-napping ships once docked, you see a stunning, ultra-modern building. It's a vast, circular structure, a tilted disk of granite and glass that seems to rise from the sea like a new sun, or perhaps a massive computer chip. This is the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the new Library of Alexandria. Inaugurated in 2002, it is a deliberate, audacious attempt to resurrect the spirit of the ancient library, a testament to the enduring power of that original dream. You walk towards it, and the scale is immense. The exterior wall is a sweeping curve of gray Aswan granite, the same stone used in ancient pharaonic monuments. Carved into this wall are characters and symbols from every known alphabet in human history, a visual representation of the library's new global mission. It's a powerful statement that this library belongs not just to Egypt or the Mediterranean, but to the entire world. It's a conscious correction of the old library's Helleноcentric bias. Stepping inside, you are struck by the light. The vast, tiered reading room cascades down 11 levels, all illuminated by natural light filtering through the sloping, louvered glass roof. It's designed to protect the books from direct sun, a modern architectural solution to the same problem the ancient librarians faced. The space is open, airy, and holds a staggering potential of 8 million books. It's a cathedral of learning, filled with the quiet hum of students and scholars hunched over laptops and books. It's a scene that would be both alien and deeply familiar to Callimachus or Eratosthenes. The technology has changed, but the fundamental act of study remains the same. This new library is more than just a collection of books. It's a massive cultural complex, housing museums, art galleries, a planetarium, and research centers. This is a direct echo of the ancient Mausoleum, which was never just about the library, but was a holistic center for arts and sciences. There's a manuscript restoration lab, where technicians use cutting-edge technology to preserve fragile, ancient texts, a poignant tribute to the work of the scribes who once toiled to recopy decaying papyrus. There's a center for documenting the history of science, acknowledging the groundbreaking work that was done on this very soil dot, but the new library also grapples with the legacy of the old one's failures. It's a public institution, open to everyone, a deliberate move away from the elitism of the Mausoleum. It exists in a country and a world wrestling with censorship, political instability, and the challenge of digitizing knowledge issues that are modern reincarnations of the problems that plagued its ancient predecessor. Historians and critics still debate its role. Is it a vanity project, a beautiful but underutilized monument? Or is it a genuine catalyst for a new intellectual flowering in the Arab world? The jury is still out. The most profound echo, however, is the one you feel inside yourself. The story of the ancient library forces us to reflect on how we value, preserve, and share knowledge today. We live in our own Alexandrian age. The internet has given us a library of unimaginable size, a collection that would make Ptolemy weep with envy. We have, at our fingertips, access to more information than any scholar in the ancient world could have dreamed of. But this digital library has its own fragilities. It's vulnerable to censorship, to the decay of link rot, to the biases of algorithms, and to the consolidation of information in the hands of a few powerful tech companies. Our scrolls are not papyrus, but servers, and they are just as susceptible to being burned, unplugged, or simply forgotten. The quirky tidbit of our modern age is that we are creating more information in a single day than was likely held in the entire ancient library. But are we any wiser for it? The story of Alexandria is a timeless and humbling reminder that collecting information is not the same as creating wisdom. The library's ultimate legacy is not in the ghosts of the scrolls we lost, but in the enduring human impulse to learn, to question, to catalog, to debate, and to build something that will outlast us. It's a dream of a universal repository of thought, a place where all our stories can be gathered and understood. It was a dream that failed, spectacularly and tragically, but it was so beautiful, so audacious, that we can't help but try to dream it again. The memory of the gleaming modern library begins to soften, its sharp architectural lines blurring into the gentle haze of the ancient past. The sun sets over the Mediterranean, the same sun that once glinted off the Pharos lighthouse and warmed the marble of the Mausoleum's colonnades. The story is over, but the quiet echoes remain, whispering on the warm evening air. The tale of the library is not just a history of a place, but a story about the fragility of our own creations, the patient work of generations undone in a moment, and the persistent, hopeful light of knowledge that somehow, against all odds, refuses to be extinguished entirely. It's a reminder that every idea is a delicate flame, needing to be sheltered, fed, and passed carefully from one hand to the next, through the long dark stretches of the night. So let the sounds of ancient Alexandria fade away now. Let the murmur of scholarly debate, the crackle of burning papyrus, and the roar of the mob recede into the quiet of your own room. Feel the weight of your own comfortable bed, the gentle press of the pillow beneath your head. The past is a vast and fascinating country, but it is a place we can only visit in our dreams. The ghosts on the shelves are silent now, their stories told. Allow your own thoughts to slow, to drift, to settle like dust on an unread scroll. There is nothing more to learn tonight, nothing more to see. There is only the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet anchor in the peaceful darkness. Let the last vestiges of this journey dissolve, leaving behind only a sense of calm and a deep, restful peace.